Everyone should get into retro cars. They're a lot of fun. Hey folks, welcome back to vlogging and all of that stuff. Today we're going to chat about starter retro. So for people mainly kind of looking into getting into retro cars, so if you're already a thorough retro fan, this may be of general interest to you, or you can point all of your friends that have thought about dipping their toes into this world in this direction, and we will try and get you started. So there's two bits to this video, and I'll try and link underneath if I can work out how to do the time stamping stuff. The first bit will be around £3,000, and that's kind of aimed at people looking at sort of second cars and kind of, I mean, it could be a first car, like a main daily driver, but we're looking at people that are perhaps a little bit older, a little bit more disposable income, that kind of thing. We haven't gone too high with it because I didn't want to go, hey, everybody, go out and buy these £8,000 classics and not really know what you're doing with them. So it was a little bit a sort of finger in the air, like let's go £3,000. And then the second part will be £1,500 to £1,000. That's kind of more aimed at those of us on a tighter budget, as I was when I started with retro cars, and first time drivers, so people that either just passed their test or maybe have had their first car and want to get something a little bit more interesting. And I'll explain why the price differences are there as we go through. But yeah, timestamp underneath, and you can jump to the bit relevant to you if you want, or you can just keep watching. So for £3,000, my criteria were the car had to be working. There's no projects at £3,000. I mean, obviously you can find a £3,000 project, but if you're having your first retro experience, you don't want to be having a car that you've got to spend a year working on before it's roadworthy. Then the second part of that is also for £3,000, I wanted something that actually was roadworthy. So there are plenty of cars you can pick up for about £3,000 that have an MOT, or maybe you don't even need an MOT anymore, and are, quote, on the road. But you're going to end up sometimes with those things having a bad experience that will put you off just owning older cars in general. So I was trying to keep it to cars that were pretty much good to go. You're not going to find 20,000 mile models for majority of cars at this kind of price range, but there's a few of those gems out there. But you will find cars that you can reliably work on, so it just needs servicing and you just get to enjoy the car. That was ultimately what we wanted. Probably unmodified for the most part, but you can find somebody bought a cheaper car, wheels, lows, all that kind of thing to make it a little bit cooler, and you can get that kind of experience for this sort of money. But yeah, it doesn't include like tax and MOT and all that kind of stuff, and insurance, because I can't tell you what your insurance is going to be because I don't know you. But we can point you in the right directions to help out with those sort of things. All of this is based on a thread that's on Retro Ride, so click underneath for that. It will, I suspect, be an ongoing thread, so it will have both the £3,000 and the cheaper cars in there on a sort of ongoing basis at whatever comes up on eBay. So if you're watching this in the far-flung future of 2019 or even 2025, have a look in there, and somebody somewhere will have probably pointed you at a car that's ideal for you. So what we're looking for in our sort of good quality cars that are working is something a little bit interesting. So I think I went pre-1990 for the £3,000, probably running up to about 95 because there's always that sort of wiggle room at the end. But I wanted what I would consider sort of core retro cars, things built in the 80s and 70s, like that sort of safe zone where you don't have to go, is this retro? It definitely is. So there's a whole raft of vehicles in there that can work for you, and I'm going to run through those in a minute. At this price point as well, we can include some of the sort of like the Luxo barges that come in cheap because they cost a lot to run, but they only cost a lot to run if you're using them daily. If it's your sort of weekend car, then you're just taking it on jaunts here and there, then that's all good. I think there probably is going to be more of the smaller engined sort of 80s hatches and things because they're still a reasonable price point. But we can try and get into the 70s and even some of the 60s cars. When you start to go back that far, one thing I found previously is if you go in at this price point in sort of the majority of 60s cars, they'll need work. And I kind of want to avoid that on a starter retro. Second retro, sure, like maybe I'll do a follow up video with where to go to next. But for your first retro car, you want something you can jump in and drive. Occasionally, you might need to tinker with it. Occasionally, you'll hit the ignition and it just isn't going to start. But you'll learn about your electrics and your carbs and whatever else. Hopefully, avoiding fancy EFI systems. Just get to know your cars and then you'll get comfortable working on them. And these cars generally are simpler. For particularly for the early 80s stuff and the 70s stuff, you're not generally going to be plugging in an OBD2 reader into it to find out what's wrong with it and then have to do weird engine diagnostics on computers and laptops and things. It's going to be fiddling around with screwdrivers and spanners and stuff. Again, another follow-up video potentially for this is kind of how to set up your first garage for starting on these cars. It doesn't require a lot, and any idiot can do it. It's later on that you repeatedly break your cars when you get overly ambitious. So let's have a run through of the sort of stuff we're looking at for about $3,000. I'll include things that are on eBay and stuff as I do this. Again, if you're watching this in the future, they're probably not still on there, and if they are still on there, you probably don't want to buy that one because there maybe will be a reason. And then I'll try and show you kind of some modified examples. So Retro Ride is predominantly a modified car forum. We like our standard cars. We have people restoring to concourse spec classics and things like that. And that we love all that business. But predominantly we're a modified car community. So we like our wheels. We like some lows, some engine mods, and all that kind of stuff. And you can generally get away with that. And aftermarket parts availability is going to be a consideration when looking at older cars. So if you've got an MG or a Mini or the majority of Fords, you're going to be able to find those parts and get those parts. If you've got some obscure Talbot, you're going to have more difficulty finding parts. However, some of the more obscure cars like the Simcas and things have fantastic owners clubs that have people that have catalogues of spares. That's an owners club, same thing. So you don't always have to be scared of these things, but as we go through, I'll sort of talk a bit more about that on individual cars. Let's start simply. Nissan Micra. Small car, small engine. They built them in their billions. They're everywhere. They were owned by all sorts of people, particularly older folk who wanted a small car to just potter around in so you can pick them up with low mileages. And they've never reached the point at which their prices have skyrocketed. So the K10 is the early Micra, it's like the slightly boxier one, but even into the K11, which is the slightly curvier one, they still get accepted into the retro scene with a bit of modification, the curvy ones. So you can be rolling around in a low mileage, very clean, very well preserved car for well less than $3,000. They respond really well to modification if you want to go down that route. Or if you just want to sort of potter around in something kind of small and simple for a little bit whilst you get your feet, they're great. There are parts out there for them. There's inspiration from Japanese car scene. They are the perfect starter retro in many, many respects. I would thoroughly recommend them. They can be a lot of fun. They even have a motorsport history to a certain degree. People rally them. You can get the March S turbocharged lunatic ones. They got the whole gamut of what you want. They have an owners club, active communities, and all that stuff. So Nissan Micra, probably bizarrely enough, would be one of my top picks for a first retro car. In fact, having just said all that, I now want one. The Vauxhall Nova, not the SRI ones, because they are getting on for some proper money nowadays, because all of the people that wanted them when they were kids can kind of now want them and still afford them. So the prices are gradually creeping up as supply dwindles on the SRI. However, pretty much every other Nova is still out there for affordable money within our price range, often quite clean. They respond well to modification. They respond relatively well to being stock. I wouldn't leave a Nova stock, to be honest with you. There seems to be plenty of parts availability. There's a strong community for them. There's still magazines about the Vauxhall scene. So and shows and all that kind of stuff. So you're kind of onto a winner in terms of both community and simplicity of car. Talking of cars with a community, the Mark II Golf, even a Mark II Golf GTI, can come in at affordable levels within the this 3K price bracket. You're never going to be short parts as far as I can tell. You've definitely got a community already out there willing to support and help and inspire you to enjoy the car. They definitely respond well to modification. They are relatively easy to look after. In fact, I would say they're one of the easier cars to look after because of the parts availability. Yes, you need to look out for rust on the slightly cheaper ones, but you know you'll find that out. There are buyer's guides out there for these things. You're not going to go into this in the dark. So yeah, I would say Mark II Golf definitely a possibility for a starter retro. In fact, I would say it'd be one of the top 3 choices for them, simply for the scene that surrounds them being useful for parts and knowledge. You don't necessarily have to be in the scene. You don't have to, slam your car or stick air ride or stick foosh on it or whatever. But it's great that it's there. It makes life a lot easier when something goes wrong. And sometimes with these old cars, things do go wrong. The Ford Orion, the sort of slightly poorer brother to the Escort or the Sierra of a similar era, they are a great looking car nowadays. You can pretty obviously slap a set of BBS wheels on it, drop it a little bit, and you're just onto a winner. There's a couple of cars floating around like that. They don't have what would affectionately be referred to as scene tax on them, much as I dislike the term, but they're not the car that shot up in price because everybody wanted them. So, and you can hot them up a bit, and you can make a great car out of them. They're not a bad car to start with, I guess, but you can make a better car out of them nowadays for not a lot of outlay on top of your initial outlay. And again, parts in general can be obtained. I think mechanical parts are easier than body panels and stuff, but they're out there. Ford is a big scene. They've got support. Bigger Vauxhall this time, the Mark II Cavalier. So I'm a big fan of the Mark II Cavalier Owners Club. They are a great bunch of people. They've been coming to our shows for years, and the cars have stayed at like a fairly level price range for a good quality one. They have a slightly sort of large hatchback thing going on, which I don't think necessarily appealed to everyone. Same with the Toyota Carina of a similar era, sort of the late 80s, early 90s. It's like a large 4-door hatchback, and they don't seem to have ignited any passions in the market, as it were. However, there are Mark II Cavalier enthusiasts, and there should be because they're a great car. The most popular picture I've put on Instagram this year has been of a Mark II Cavalier. So there's plenty of support. There is parts availability. There is effectively an owners club. And they're a good kind of social car, and they're a good little car. And not to say it again, but modification opportunities abound on them. So, and they're a great kind of entry into that whole scene, into the Vauxhall scene, where there's lots of other places to go if eventually Cavaliers are not doing it for you. So yeah, it's definitely worth a look on the Cavalier front, because you can probably pick up a very clean one for good money. On the slightly newer front, E34 BMWs, they are sort of fairly robust as far as I can tell. There's a little bit of rust. You need to check sort of suspension points and things like that. But they seem to be a car that have survived well from being in their era. They still look good. They still look relatively modern, to be honest. And I think that they'd make a good kind of barge to start with, of some description. The estates look great. Drop them a bit lower, and you're absolutely going to be turning heads. Love them. For a slightly more oddball choice, and particularly if you're an architect, as goes the joke, Saab 99 Possibly Saab 900 as well. Prices kind of fluctuate depending on sort of quality of the car. These are a quirky car. All Saabs are kind of quirky cars, but all Saabs are generally well built, and also generally well looked after. I mean, I've seen a few rot boxes around the place, but most of the ones that are surviving now seem to be very clean, seem to be very well looked after. So if you can find one for the money you're looking at, if you can get one under 3k, and they are out there, I've seen a few for sale, then they're a good purchase for something that's just straight out the box, unusual. You don't need to start fanning around with modifications and stuff. You've just got an interesting, slightly oddball car. Obviously, then that comes with the question mark around parts availability, but people are keeping them going quite readily. So stuff is out there. You just need to find the right people. Again, there's Saab Central and various other places you can go to find bits and pieces. So not a car to be too afraid of, but definitely a car that would get you instant retro winning points. And then probably the starter retro, regardless actually of if you're coming in under 15 or coming in under 3 grand, your VW Polo. Parts are available, cars are cheap, they're very plentiful. So they've got everything that's going on with the Micra, but they've got the VW scene. So they've got kind of, there's cars out there to inspire you or to get involved with, and social events if that's kind of where you're coming from. It's all ready built into the VW scene. So VW Polo is a great little entry level. But whatever you want to do, if you want to go motorsport, you can get a VW Polo. If you want to slam your car and cruise around the streets, you can get a VW Polo. If you want to have a simple daily driver that's just a little bit retro and a little bit quirky, VW Polo does it all. So the earlier Mark 1, Mark 2 Polos are probably ideal. Bread vans, still a good look. You can pick up VW Derbys, which have the boot, which are a little bit more unusual, but they come in under the 3 grand price bracket for clean ones. Yeah, I would say VW Polo is kind of the no brainer. If you're just going, I just want something old, want to get into this a little bit, see how I like it, see whether I like having to fiddle with my cars occasionally to make them work, but I still want to go to shows and enjoy myself. Yeah, get yourself a VW Polo. They're great. Hey, so it's the slightly cheaper end of the market here, or the new owner. So I'll explain why I put this in for the younger driver. You may well be able to get hold of 3 grand or whatever. Like that's not a problem nowadays with the way credit works for a lot of people, and people seem fine getting themselves in debt. If that's what you want to do, fine. If you wanted 3 grand, you could do that. The problem you've got on older cars is insurance. Just end of story. Insurance for younger drivers on older cars is a pain. So you could buy a car for £1,000 and still end up with £2,000 insurance bill. So there's your 3 grand already. So you have to look at the cheaper cars. You can also consider what type of car you're looking at as well. I wouldn't be recommending some 4 litre V8 for someone that's just learnt to drive. You're going to be ending up around the 1 litre, 1.2, 1.4 maybe, or under mark. That having been said, I had a 2 litre Sierra as my second car, and the insurance on that was not too horrific as a named driver on someone else's. So, we'll, that is the thing to investigate when you're looking at these cars. Yes, you want a car that you can jump in and work on and all that kind of thing, and won't cost you the earth to keep going. But equally, you need something you can insure and you can not feel it's such a massive burden to own this car. Because if it is, eventually you'll probably think I might as well do something else with my money. And we don't want that. We love you in the retro community. So, yeah, let's see what we can find in that price bracket for newer drivers. Equally, there are massive bargains to be had for those that are older, can get the classic insurance. Classic insurance kicks in about age 25 as far as I remember, and it becomes a lot cheaper, but you might be on a limited budget. I mean, my first retro car was £1,000. My third retro car was £1,000. It's just like some of us, that's all we got. So that's kind of fine. There's still stuff out there for you. So the age bracket on this kind of extends up to sort of 98, 99, which is very borderline on sort of the whole retro thing. But, you know, it's still basically a 20-year-old car at this point. So ideally it would be 25, but, you know, ideally insurance wouldn't be a fortune. And ideally parts would be available for cars from the 1960s. So it's the world we live in, so we just have to deal with that. So what we got here is cars that will not cost you the earth to insure, hopefully, if you're young, or it will cost you the earth to insure if you're young, but if you're a bit older, you can probably get classic insurance. They're kind of the right age to do that. Then we're always looking for cars that you can kind of get in and go with. We don't want something you need to do a project beforehand, something you need to spend 6 months trying to get an MOT. Those cars are out there, and if that kind of thing appeals, you'll be able to find them. I would say for a first retro car, you just want to avoid that. You just want something you can use, even if it's only for a little while, and you go, right, okay, I'm kind of into this, I know this is what I want, and then you'll go out and find yourself your big project or whatever. It's better to be out there enjoying your car than in here just wishing your car was working, as I have been on a number of occasions over the past couple of years. And it just kind of sucks, but I'm already in it. I think if it had been the first year of ownership, I'd have probably gone and found another hobby. So don't do that to yourself. There are people on the forum saying they couldn't insure like a 1.4 or 1.5 for less than $1,500, but some insane V10 was £700 to insure because of the statistics around it. So Ahmad, one of our administrators, has recently insured his son on a car. They couldn't get reasonable insurance on a 1.1 Fiesta, but a 1.0 Panda was £800 or £900 cheaper to insure, even though ultimately they're kind of basically the same power. So that doesn't even make it easy for you to work out what can be insured cheaply. So there's going to be some legwork in this if you are a new driver. If you're not a new driver and you're just on a budget, the world is the mollusk of your choice, because you should be able to get classic insurance on the majority of the things we're going to go through. We're kind of some of the later end of the market, perhaps not, but we'll try and stick with things that you should be able to get classic insurance on. We should probably do a whole episode on insurance, really. It is a big part of what we do. We all spend a lot of money on it. So I'll try and get someone in and we'll talk through it rather than just make it up off the top of my head. So let's get going. First up, it's not sexy, but it's pretty cool. It's the Rover Metro, or even the Austin Metro. Some of those come up at reasonable price. Straight off, there's a great group of guys that have got Metro Power, and they are a lot of fun. There's a lot of cool cars in there, and they're a great resource to start with. Cars can be got relatively cheap. They've got a nice ish styling. They got Rover build quality, but if they survive to this point, you should be all right. So just look out for some well looked after ones, but they've never hit crazy prices. You've got the full range in there as well. You've got like the 1.0 or 1.1, all the way up to the 1.8. You can fit silly engines in them and all of that stuff. So whatever you want to do, you probably can do with a Metro, believe it or not. Unsexy though they once were, their club forum has made them pretty cool in my book. I'm a big fan. Next up, slightly more obscurely, the early 90s Toyota Starlet. It's a front-wheel drive car, so it's not got the sort of rear-wheel drive drift tax on it, and it's a great-looking little car. Again, it's a kind of small hatchback. It's kind of what you're going to expect at this kind of price point, at this kind of engine size, at the sort of the lower level engine size. You're going to expect small hatchbacks, and then you just got to see how that works out for insurance. The Starlet is a good looking car of that era. There's plenty of nicely modified ones floating around, or at least inspiration for nicely modified ones. You can look at a car that's a similar shape and go, oh, I'll just do that to it if you want to modify, if you can modify, because of age and all that stuff. But if you can find one, have a look at them. They are a good little car. Okay, slight tangent now. The kind of late 80s, early 90s Renaults as a whole, things like the Renault 19, even the Renault 25. So these wouldn't necessarily, I wouldn't aim at a first time driver. They're going to be slightly larger cars, but worth looking into just in case, because of the weirdness of insurance, you may be able to get one at actually a reasonable insurance cost. They're kind of odd sometimes because they're French cars from the early 90s, but they are great cars, really. The Renault Turbo.co.uk people were probably your best bet for help with them, even though they're not necessarily going to be turbocharged cars. You can get them in sort of diesel form and petrol form, and you can get some hotted up ones. But yeah, just the early 90s Renaults, they haven't really sort of sparked a fire in people in terms of value, so they can still be picked up reasonably well. Keep an eye out for rust and all that kind of stuff, but you should be able to pick up good quality running ones around this price point. Just see what sort of insurance you come in at, and you may well get away with it. Sometimes these values can be surprising because of the whole interconnectedness of the way insurance works. On the subject of French cars, the Peugeot 205 is another option. So the GTI has definitely gone way beyond this value. But just about every other Peugeot 205, so the 4-door, the 1.1 2-door, the diesels, they all seem to be stuck in this price bracket. And that's fine for you and me, because we get to pick them up for reasonable money, get the enjoyment of having something slightly older, slightly more interesting. The potential for modification is there if you wish to. Definitely a sort of bargain way into a cool looking car. I mean, you can get the 1.1 2-door, which effectively looks like a 205. So you don't have to 205 style it, but if you like the styling of a 205, you can kind of get there without having the extra price tag on it. You don't get the performance, but when you're starting out, that's kind of only one thing to worry about. The rest of it is just the fun of ownership. Next up, the Mark III Astra. So this is another Vauxhall, another one of the slightly unloved Vauxhalls, but I don't see why it would be. They're kind of a great little car, sort of small. You can get 4-door, 2-door hatch. You can get the GTE, which is the hotted up one. I don't think you're going to get one of those in reasonable condition at this money, but sometimes things surprise you. They got a good scene, they got magazines, they got people that love them. They're a good way of getting into this kind of stuff because they are a kind of cult classic already, without having cult classic values associated with them. So have a look at the Mark III Astra. You may well be able to pick one up for a reasonable amount of money in very good condition. Fiat Panda, it's the new 2CV as far as I'm concerned. It's simple, it's basic, I repeat myself. It's relatively easy to maintain. It's small, it's lightweight, it will get you from A to B, and seemingly, if you look down in the southern parts of Europe, it will go on forever. Definitely a cult classic already, again with the 4x4, which I don't think you're going to get at this price bracket, but you never know. They have an odd following already, so I would definitely think you can have a lot of fun in a Fiat Panda. Grab one and see what you can do. And I think that there is an underutilization of them. There are lots of modification options for them. Similarly, in the small car that's popular in Southern Europe category, the Fiat Cinquecento. It's kind of borderline retro, really, I guess. But I think they kind of slip in there. They're small and they're front-wheel drive, but they're like basically a modern version of a Mini before all of the cars got fat. In fact, I think they're the generation of cars before everything got fat. I'm not 100% on their Euro NCAP rating. I suspect it's probably in the negative numbers. If that is a concern of yours, I might avoid them. But as I say, they are the new Mini to me. And that having been said, you can kind of pick up old Minis sometimes at this kind of price, but they tend to be a little bit rustier. So if you want a lot of fun, I would thoroughly recommend a Cinquecento. For a bit of 80s Japaneseness, Honda Civic, you can't go wrong, or even the Honda Accord. They both seem to come in at reasonable prices. They are cool little cars, again, small hatchbacks. They've got a following. There's a group of people that already love them and will help out and get them on the road and go and be social with, and seem to have a lot of fun with the cars. So thoroughly recommend the 80 Civics, and they're a relatively easy car to maintain. They're kind of well built, I would hope, at this point, those that have survived. So parts supply may be an issue, but you would hope you can cope with that. So yeah, they are, of the cars and in my kind of lower level car list, they're probably the one I would most like to have a play with. And then that brings us probably onto the pick of the bunch. It's a little bit newer than most of the others, but the VW Polo 6N, which is interesting because the Mark II Polo, an earlier ideal in a slightly higher price bracket. This price bracket, you're looking at a 6N Polo. So we're talking mid to late 90s, possibly early 2000s, but we'll pretend that doesn't exist. And they're a simple car to look after. Parts are available. There's a scene for them. There's people that will help you out. You can get answers to your questions. And theoretically, they should be relatively reliable and should work for you. That's not always the case I've had with VWs I've owned in the past, but the Polo seems to be one of those that just keeps going. And you can pick them up relatively cheaply. You might be able to pick up one of those, one owner from you, 30,000 miles, old lady ownership that potted down to the shops and back. Still, those are still about because of the age of the car. So, yeah, have a look at the Polo 6N. Insurance shouldn't be too much of a problem for the younger folk, and it's a good way into our scene. You won't get sniffed out of a retro show in a 6N, but you will be on the border. So the other selection here is a little bit are all a little bit earlier. But yeah, we'll let you in with the 6N. So one thing I will say for the guys and girls that are younger and are just getting into the scene, there is a group called the Young Retro Motor Club who are active on Instagram. I think they're active on Facebook if anybody's still using that. But they are definitely around about. They come to our shows. They go to a lot of other shows. They are a very social group. They're a great group of guys and girls. And they are there for younger owners of retro cars. So check them out. Also see what they're running, because they may well have some nicer insights in terms of insurance. I know there's a few imps floating around in that group. So it could be that they've been able to find good insurance deals and stuff for you. But yeah, they're a good group. Obviously, Retro Rise itself is full of knowledgeable people. We have the starters retro thread, so if you've got any questions, just jump into there, just throw in your question, and somebody will be along to answer it. Just want a bit of advice on, what to get or what you're looking for, or what's even around at the moment. We know where to look for cars. eBay is definitely a good choice, but there are other places, and also kind of what to look for. And we want more of you in the scene, both older, younger, anybody. Just join in with us in the retro scene, because we're having a lot of fun, and we think you would too. So that's it for now. It's coming up to Christmas at this point, so if you're watching before Christmas, happy Christmas, or any other midwinter festival you might be celebrating, because there are an awful lot of them. If you're watching this in the summer, I hope it's a really nice long hot one, because we got some car shows next year that we'd like you to come to. And we'll be back probably after Christmas with another video. There's more to talk about around this subject, obviously, but we'll pick up something else next time. See you soon.